next speaker is Julie Scheimer. Julie is the President and CEO of Welsh Allyn, and also is a member of the task force. And I don't know what Julie's going to talk about, but part of the flip the model idea is really for companies to reach out to universities and identify their particular needs rather than having people do research inside the universities and hope somebody was interested. And so, Julie?
Thank you. So thank you, Ted, for the invitation to speak at the conference. I'm very excited to talk about the task force results, and it was my privilege to serve on it. I was asked to talk about the industry perspective on the task force report, and I do not pretend to speak for industry in general, but I can talk about one company's perspective. And I had to take the opportunity to tell you just a little bit about Welsh Allyn since you're on Welsh Allyn's campus. So let me start just by saying that this company was, as Bob mentioned earlier, founded in 1915, and you're at the worldwide headquarters here in Skaneateles Falls. It's a privately held, family-owned company. The Allyn family still owns it today. And we're a worldwide company. So while our headquarters are here, we have manufacturing facilities and research facilities, and of course sales facilities around the world. So just thinking a little bit about innovation at Welsh Allyn, we have a long history of developing new products. We were the first to develop and market products that automate vital signs measurement. You're very familiar with these today if you've ever been in a physician's office or a hospital. And there are other competitors today, but we invented that category. We also invented a number of products for earlier detection and improved diagnostics, like the ophthalmoscope, which was the first product to be developed at Welsh Allyn by Dr. Welch and William Noah Allyn. The video otoscope, the FDT visual field screener, which helps detect glaucoma, and work by Rich Newman, who's here with us today, perhaps even early detection of Alzheimer's. SureSight, which is autorefractive index for preverbal children, and it has saved probably tens of thousands of children from blindness. And then systems that streamline patient flow and data management. So these are central monitoring stations and data capture and management, particularly today in getting data to electronic medical records. So as you heard, we started out with a single diagnostic instrument in 1915. That was an instrument that actually existed before, but it was the size of this podium, and it was used only in an ophthalmologist's office. So our innovation was to shrink it and make it simple to use so that it became a staple of every general practitioner. We went on to develop lamps, high-precision lamps for our medical instruments, and from there, fiber optics barcode scanning, which we spun off to a separate company, Handheld Products, which was sold to Honeywell in 2007, and then capturing on some work we did in endoscopy, worked in video inspection, which is a product line that we sold off to GE in 2005. Now we're solely focused on medical diagnostic equipment, and much of it was invented by us, but much of it was also acquired. So we've used both models, and you can see here how we've acquired a variety of measurements and technologies over the years. We are known for our innovation, and we've received a lot of awards for design, user interface, and applications in the medical field. And we're, as I said, a global company, so we have two major businesses, a US and Canada business, which is the larger of the two, and an international business. About 2/3 of our business is inside the US and about 1/3 outside. So what are the things that are driving us and our innovation agenda? Well, one is skyrocketing costs associated with the delivery of healthcare, and particularly chronic disease management. The fact that there is a decentralization of care in healthcare, and you'll experience this if you go to a retail clinic, or if you go to an ambulatory surgery center, or if you find yourself going to a physician's office for treatment you used to go to the hospital for. the fact that you're in a hospital for just a day or two instead of a week. So that's all pushing diagnosis into lower acuity care settings with less well-trained workers, which requires simpler to use interfaces. It drives a lot of our innovation. And then there's a lot of call for change in policies, not only in the United States, but around the world for increased efficiency, quality, and transparency regarding outcomes. So driving much of our thinking about innovation is the increased availability and lower cost of technology, and how we can take technologies which have not been widely adopted in healthcare delivery and bring them to bear on the challenges that our customers face. So if you don't know Welsh Allyn, let me tell you a little bit about our brand promise, because that's what you see right in the center here. We're really known by clinicians worldwide as providing high-quality diagnostic equipment that allows them to deliver compassionate care at the patient-clinician interface. And we do that through innovating to make their work simpler and to make it improve efficiency, so ease of use and efficiency. And we're really focused on what we call frontline care, and I'll show you in a minute what those user groups are. And of course, global reach. So here are some of our key market segments. In long-term care, nurses and clinicians, our primary focus really is on office-based clinicians, and in hospitals, and you'll know us for blood pressure cuffs, thermometry, EKGs, and just a variety of those diagnostic measurements which you really encounter on your first interface with a clinician, and that's why we call it the front line. So we have a number of solutions that we're focused on today. We're very focused on connectivity to electronic medical records. That's a big thrust of ours, and as a medical device manufacturer, we really have more of those interfaces than anyone else. That gives us a bit of a competitive advantage. And of course, we're focused on making our equipment easy to use. In the future, we're looking to provide solutions that address patient care problems that were raised in earlier talks today, improving patient safety and outcomes, providing access to information for clinical decision-making, improving workflow efficiency, and then just enhancing that clinician-patient encounter. So how do we approach innovation? The first thing, and I think Rich mentioned this earlier, is we start with the market, understanding our customer. What is it that our customer needs? Then understanding the existing technology and potentially emerging technologies. How can they be applied to address that customer need? We look at what advantages we bring, our competitive advantages relative to our competitors. We leverage our partnerships and alliances. We have a pretty clear strategy in terms of the diagnostic platform that we want to innovate on, and so it has to be consistent with that. And then we're always focused on ease of use. I think that's really what we're known for. And I'm going to give you an example here. This is a product that hasn't actually released. It's going to release in about 6 weeks. But this marketing description in this video will kind of go over the customer value proposition, and you'll actually see how we're delivering on that proposition using some technology. This was running? Okay. Why don't we just turn it off? All right.
Time wasted.
Okay, thanks.
And nearly $250,000 in productivity is lost due to manual documentation processes. This puts facility first and forces clinicians to spend more time on paperwork and less with patients. Introducing the Welsh Allyn Connect electronic vitals documentation system, an end-to-end solution that virtually eliminates errors and missing data and increases efficiency. Clinicians simply scan their ID, scan the patient's result to verify their identity, capture buttons and details such as body position, and send them to the EMR wiring
ecosystem for Welsh Allen, looking out 5 to 10, 15 years. We've looked at trying to partner with a variety of institutions, and one approach we've taken is we've created a wholly owned subsidiary of Welsh Allen called Blue Highway. Blue Highway actually exists at Syracuse University. We're in the Case Center. We use a lot of Syracuse University students, although we hired a number of researchers of our own. And we've been supported by New York State, the U.S. Department of Defense, and the U.S. National Institute of Health. The Blue Highway was formed to create economic value through new customer insight, products and services, policy and regulatory insight, and new business models. In plain language, it exists to innovate, and innovation is really about capitalizing on invention. So the way we see it, there's three kinds of innovation. There's incremental innovation, the evolutionary improvement of the technology for an existing practice. So a device to measure blood pressure on the in-flight instead of the D-flight, for example, and it's based on known needs of customers and sustains or increases market share. An example of that is the Connect's electronic vital signs documentation system I just showed you. Then there's radical innovation. That's developing a completely new technology for an existing practice. So a device to measure blood pressure without a cuff, for example. It's based on predicted needs of customers, and it explodes a market. It's a disruptive technology, perhaps. And then there's breakthrough innovation, inventing revolutionary new technology for new clinical practice. So, for example, a device to measure a new vital sign that will replace or displace the need for blood pressure monitoring completely. And that has the potential to spawn entirely new markets. At Blue Highway, our primary focus is on disruptive and breakthrough innovations in our core technology areas. And we've leveraged Blue Highway to manage our university relationships. So Blue Highway does a lot of management of direct support of research. And there's a list of universities that we're doing research with there. And in addition, we have similar government-supported labs in Singapore and in Ireland. Our Singapore and Ireland labs are more focused on the incremental innovation. So we're trying to leverage our global presence and our presence here in New York to really take advantage of university relationships and identifying technology that can be transformational for Welsh Allen. I had a video, but it's not working, so I'll skip it. But if you're interested, you can go to the Blue Highway website, and it's posted there. So, we've talked a lot about the challenges of making a change here in New York State about the way industry, universities, the government, and of course, the ever-present need for capital make a change in the way we do that. And Margaret Mead was quoted in the report, and I think it's a great quote, that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, and it's really the only thing that ever has. As an example of how a very simple innovation can be very disruptive, I was recently introduced to this book, and Peter Pronovost actually spoke at Upstate a few weeks ago. Patient safety, as you saw, is a big concern for us. It's obviously a big concern for you if you are ever a patient, you or your loved one. And this is an example of somebody who said, I want to make patient safety a science, and that's his specialty at Johns Hopkins. And he, along with his team, developed a checklist for ensuring that central line catheters were infection-free. And that's kind of a startling thought because central line catheters are known to have a certain rate of infection. It depends on the institution. They report their infection rates. He developed a procedure at Johns Hopkins, then actually at the request of the state of Michigan and their hospital association, deployed it in every hospital in Michigan. I encourage you to read this book because after you read it, there's only two places you're going to want to go to a hospital. One is Johns Hopkins, and the other one is anywhere in Michigan. But it's a relatively simple innovation, but sometimes innovation isn't about technology. Sometimes it's about sociology and the sociology of the hospital and the relationship between physicians, nurses, patients, and families. So it's a fascinating read. But what's relevant to what we're talking about today is after reading this book, I called Dr. Pronovost, and I said, you know, we're a medical device company, and we want to make our technology simpler to use. We want to contribute to improving workflows and efficiencies that contribute to patient safety. How can we work with you to do that? And he described to me how he was very excited that in the next couple weeks, and I think it's probably going to happen any day now, they're opening a patient safety institute to do clinical research on particularly user interfaces and their impact on improved patient safety, which is very important for us to know, to be able to go to our customers and say, if you use this interface, it really will improve patient safety. And they're going to do it literally for the cost of the clinical research, no ownership of IP. He said, and I think I'm quoting the president of RIT when he said, we are not in the business of making money as an institution. Johns Hopkins is not. We are in the business of saving patients. And so a very refreshing approach to working with companies. And what they hope will happen is a lot of mid-sized companies like Welsh Allen and large companies like GE and Philips and small startups will all come together in that patient safety institute and learn how to work together to improve patient safety. In healthcare, and we heard about the need for innovation in healthcare, and I thought it would be kind of fascinating to look at the top 10 most innovative companies according to Fast Company. I'm sorry we're not in this group, but I think one day we aspire to be. I think you're all familiar with the health imagination that GE has talked about in the Super Bowl commercials. Quite irritating to us at Welsh Allen, I should say. But if you go down below that, that largely has to do with connecting imaging and making imaging simpler to use. But if you go down below that, it's fascinating the technologies that are having an impact on healthcare. So if you look at patients like me in Athena Health, these are cloud computing applications that are making it easier for physicians to access and patients to access information without having to be the masters of IT. Sermo Web Company, Kaiser Permanente implementing broadly an EMR solution. Walgreens retail clinics. Intuitive Surgical, you know who they are? Da Vinci Robot. Cisco implementing mobile clinics using their network technology to make a very secure, high reliability network for mobile clinics. And then second site is the one sort of classical medical device company in here, an implant. American Well doing web consults. So a lot of web, cloud computing, retail, innovative new business models, not really the kind of thing you'd expect to be necessarily at the top of healthcare innovation, and yet there it is. Well, let me bring it back down to the governor's task force report. This is sort of a summary of the 7 recommendations, and Daniel went over these this morning, so I'm not going to do it again, but I am going to refer to number 2, transforming industry practices. So the key findings of the committee was that industry spending on research and development by New York-based companies dwarfs higher education spending on research and development. Yet industry-sponsored research with New York universities was less than other states. And we've talked about some of the potential reasons for that. What is it that we as industry can do to sort of break that logjam? Well, we should adopt a push and pull model of collaboration. So industry should seek to develop enduring relationships with universities, pushing business needs into academic partners' research agendas. Likewise, universities should solicit information on industry research and technical requirements in order to better meet the needs of industry. And at Welsh Allen, this is exactly what we're trying to do with Blue Highway. Daniel also briefly mentioned that another member of the committee, or of the task force, Linda Sanford from IBM, assembled a group called the ARMONC Group, and it's a group of industry leaders and university leaders to develop a plan between public and private higher education, corporations, and government to revive economic growth in New York State, essentially to see how can we implement the recommendations of the task force to build New York State's leadership and ultimately drive job growth to restore our state as the innovation capital of the world. So our approach is a collaborative one between academia, industry, and government. We recognize, as was outlined in the task force, that all sectors must come together in collaboration and partnership with a common goal, and that includes SUNY, CUNY, CICU, the industry, state government. And our goal as part of and I am part of the Armonk group as well, is to develop 2 or 3 bold proposals with opportunity for job creation, utilizing an economic development, research, and education connection. And a united New York State approach, no upstate, downstate, or Long Island silos. What can we do sort of statewide? Our goal is to craft our message and action plan to the current and future New York State governor, and when ready, convene a stakeholder summit. So it would be just great if next year at this time we were talking about the output of that work. So if you think about the way forward, and many of these points have already been talked about, that states have to address infrastructure, capital, and workforce development. That's what's required for industry to thrive. And they must capitalize on their intangible assets to create comparative advantage. And so in the task force report, we talked about the specific industries where we believe we have a competency, where we have assets to deploy, and those are the ones we really ought to focus on. A new framework for state and regional economic growth must recognize the role of entrepreneurship. So we've talked about that, identifying opportunities, the availability of early stage capital, and a support infrastructure for entrepreneurial growth. We talked about how important it is to industries that universities encourage and support licensing research to the private sector and the development of commercial applications. And it's really interesting how we each have a piece of the puzzle. We have a lot of knowledge about commercializing technology. And through basic research, universities generated a lot of ideas and technologies that could be applied to the types of patient problems and clinician problems, for example, that we're trying to address. And somehow we have to figure out a way to come together and leverage those 2 capabilities and recognize the value of each and the difference of each. I think regions like New York State are going to leverage 3 primary sources of competitive advantage. Our labor force, so just creating, and you see this, in Silicon Valley and other places that have this really strong entrepreneurial cultures. You see a labor pool that can move around, that has the competencies that are needed for the particular areas of competence. And you need supplier networks. And I think that's something we kind of suffer from up here in upstate New York. We have some logistics challenges. And then we need to be able to take advantage of technology spillovers. And again, this is one thing we're sort of trying to attempt to do with our Blue Highway organization is to address those technologies which may have a medical application but may have other applications. How can we direct that to other development opportunities? We as Welsh Allyn aren't going to take advantage of them, but how can we leverage them for economic development? Now, interestingly enough, last week I was at our Beaverton facility in Oregon, and I was speaking to the Oregon Biosciences Association conference, and I had talked to their director ahead of time, and they are facing exactly the same kind of issues that we are in New York, and so I just gave them a report out, basically, this task force. And I learned a few things about what they're doing in Oregon, and I thought I might share them here. They're not as successful, for example, as Utah is, and they're looking to Utah as a model. But they have had some success. In 2005, the governor and legislature created the Oregon Innovation Council with the following goals: to increase wages, to create new high-quality jobs for Oregon communities, to create a stronger research base capable of enabling innovation, and to increase the availability of venture, seed, and private capital for Oregon entrepreneurs. Looks very familiar, right? And I should say a couple other things. They created Innovate, Collaborate Oregon, which is their 4 major research universities collaborating, which was quite a hurdle for them. The Oregon Innovation Showcase, where once a year they get together, industry, university, capital, entrepreneurs, and share what innovations are being contemplated and developed in Oregon. And they also have the universities have created a single IP website that gives industry visibility to university IP, which I think is a great idea, and it was one of the recommendations of the task force. So what's occurred since their original plan was implemented in 2007, the results include 23 million in new federal grants, 36 million leveraged industry resources, 10 new companies launched, product and development support to 27 companies, planning underway for $50 million investment in ocean power technology, and 50 novel chemicals discovered for possible use in fighting malaria, staph, fungal infections, and food poisoning. So, you know, a lot of progress there for them. So if we step back and ask, how do we spur innovation? I just want to refer to some of the findings of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They held a conference in Paris at the end of May to discuss how to foster innovation, and here's some of their recommendations. And these are recommendations to industry: to invest in education, research, and knowledge supporting infrastructure. And that's really what we've been talking about, how to get more investment from industry and how to leverage that. And then simply funding research is not enough. Government should stimulate demand. So economies benefit not from the invention of new products and services, but from their diffusion. And that's really, again, where industry comes into play. We have a distribution network. We know how to get a product into that distribution network and get it diffused. Knowledge networks and open business models produce profitable innovations with little or no research in-house. And creating services versus product relation innovation should be emphasized. And this was also a point made in the task force report, that there are many innovations to be had in services. In our little video, it was sort of buried in their Partners in Care. If you didn't know Welsh Allyn, you wouldn't know. That's a major new innovation for us. We have not sold our products with services, and we've not had remote diagnostics available previously. So those are two new innovations for us. And creating service innovation is an opportunity that we need to recognize. And then finally, as an example, selling software via the internet has in turn enabled other innovations. So there's the business model innovation and distribution model innovation. So there's a wide range of innovations that matter to industry, not just products, not just scientific technologies. But certainly leveraging those, leveraging advances in IT, in computing power, and networks, all can be combined to address the challenges that we face as industry. So I'm going to close there and ask if you have any questions. Okay, what we mean by open innovation, and I actually think this might be Linda Sanford's term, she wrote a book on this, is that all innovation doesn't come from within the company. And I think this is fundamentally what we're talking about. Like, so innovation could come from anywhere. It could come from our own internal R&D. It could come from a university lab or university research. It could come from another company, from a partner, from a startup, from a government lab. You know, in other words, what we do is we say, what is it? We start with, and this is turning the process around. We start with what's needed by the customer, and then we as a company look for where can we find the innovations to support meeting that need. And it might be that we fund it with internal R&D, but it might be that we find it somewhere else. Most companies have much better internal R&D processes than they do processes for identifying technology and research outside the boundaries of their industry. So for us, Blue Highway was sort of an experiment to see could we get more efficient at identifying technologies from other places other than internally. That's why we literally moved them out of State Street here and over to Syracuse University. And I think they've been very successful at identifying technologies that could be beneficial to us. But that's what we mean by open innovation. Yes?
percentage of your annual budget does your company or companies typically spend on R&D, and what portion of that percentage is spent through university partnerships?
We're private companies, so I don't have to answer that. I'm not going to answer that, but I'll answer part of it. So I would say in medical device companies, R&D spend is somewhere between 3 and 10% of annual revenues. That would be typical. You know, a startup might spend a little more, and a company that did a lot of growth by acquisition might spend a little less. But say somewhere, it's wide, 3 to 10%. So I'm not going to answer that question, but I will answer the next one, which is we spend 10% of our R&D budget on Blue Highway. So it's a pretty significant, yeah, it's a pretty significant investment, and we're happy with it. You know, the proof of the pudding, and there's a bunch of Blue Highway guys sitting here, so they know I'm going to say this, is when we actually implement one of these technologies that they've identified in a shipping product, and then we'll be ready to claim success. Blue Highway's been around for a little over 2 years, and they've done a great job of identifying some technologies. We have 5 or 6 we're very interested in seeing incorporated into our product roadmap, but the goal was always for them to be looking 5 to 10 years out. So, you know, it's not surprising that we don't know yet how effective it is.
I think it's important to put Blue Highway up at SU as opposed to just keeping it here.
The main reason is because we have access to Syracuse University students. So if you were to, you know, say to them, the Syracuse University students, okay, we want you to work on a project, and you've got to, you know, get in your car, get on a bus or whatever, and drive a half hour to Welsh Allen and back. We get much less of their time. In fact, we're right there on campus, and you know how students are. They work day and night. They're great. And I think they'll say it's a benefit. And Syracuse University, Mark here has helped us with this, but Nancy Cantor's been extremely supportive of this. Their goal for having us on campus is to have their students involved. And I think we've got about 26 students involved in research projects right now. And the students enjoy the work. We have a variety of projects, and they find them interesting. They can usually find something they like. And then they have all the students that have worked for us, as soon as they've graduated, gotten jobs like that. In some cases, we've hired them, but in other cases, other companies have. But they have that real world research experience, and they're really able to, you know, find a position they like because of it. So it works out for both of us. We get good work from the students, and the students get good experience they can leverage in their careers. Does that make sense? It's the main reason we do it. Yes.
Just to follow up on that, some things like when Sun wanted to develop ultimately Java, it took a group of its bright people and put them outside of the box of the corporate environment.
Yep.
To what extent is that also relevant in Blue Highway?
Well, I think the people who work in Blue Highway would say that that's a plus. You know, that it puts them in more of an academic environment than an industrial environment. So I think it's a factor, but it wasn't the primary factor. Here's a little bit of trivia. When I worked in California, previous to this, I was CEO of a little company called Vocera Communications. Our office was actually in that old Java building. They left it. Yes.
First of all, from a small local business, I'd like to thank you for putting this on. This is a nice access to a lot of information. The question I got for you is that on your Blue Highway, do you ever use any of the marketing and sales from Syracuse University?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The question was, do we ever use marketing and sales? Like I said, there's a wide range of innovative
to say a word about Welsh Island licensing in technologies. The research center I spoke about at lunch. We've done more projects with Welsh Island over the years than any other company, and with Rich Newman. And I think probably 90% of the projects we have done with Welsh Island have been helping Welsh Island identify prospective technologies to license in. And so we do these client debriefings, and we drive down here in the middle of the winter. You come down 321 to February, and it's Siberia. I look out there, I see Welsh Island, and I think, this company is harvesting the best technologies from all over the world to these farm fields, and then repackaging it, going back into the native markets, and capturing majority market share. And it's something that I really thought is probably the genius of Welsh Island, is they've never had a problem not invented here. If it's out there, it's good, it helps us in our product line, we're going after it. So, other questions? Julie, thank you. Okay, our final speaker today is Teresa Mazzulli. Teresa is the CEO of Excel Partners, which is a seed stage investment firm in Rochester. Teresa has put together some fascinating research outside of the task force report, and was very, very active in testifying before the task force report. And obviously, we'll talk a little bit about the $25 million seed fund that's part. We may or may not get some of these funds in this budget round, but I think that they are very much on the radar screen in terms of the legislation to go forward. Teresa?
You'll bear with me for just a moment while I figure out. Very good. Okay. First of all, let me say I have the dubious distinction of being the last speaker of a very long and very productive day, and believe me, I can appreciate what you feel like sitting in that chair, and I promise to respect that totally. Secondly, I do have to say that I am eternally indebted to Ted for bribing you by keeping you here for the iPod drawing. Otherwise, I would be probably speaking to Julie and Ted and maybe one or two others, and that would be it. It is my pleasure to be here this afternoon. I have to tell you with all humility, though, that there have been some really thoughtful, provocative, and energetic speakers who have preceded me today, and as you and I know, there's really nothing new under the sun. So for the next few minutes, all I really can do is say basically the same thing in a different way and reinforcing it and hopefully give you some perspective on the venture capital climate in which we are currently operating. When Ted asked me to speak, one of the things he did ask me to speak to was ask me to revisit the climate that brings us to where we are today. So with that, I will start with a white paper that was done by Excel Partners, Inc., and we actually released it in May of 2009, although it was written in February and released informally at that time. And the way it came about was that my partner Judy Albers and I, who had been doing seed stage funding for about 4 years in Upstate, were finding some very interesting realities out there, and we were keeping statistics on it, and we finally decided to put those together and to put those formally in a white paper, which was called R&D and Then What, which exposed the paradoxes of the venture capital investing, highlighted the problem, and we also proposed a solution. Some of those paradoxes are the simple fact that despite university R&D expenditure as $52 billion, New York actually has $4.5 billion, and contrary to popular assumption, that actually breaks out fairly evenly between upstate and downstate. A lot of people, when we gave our presentations, we went, once we did our white paper, we put a presentation together and we covered the entire upstate corridor, Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, Albany and gave this presentation, and oftentimes it was to the great surprise that to our upstate partners that we hold the same potential in theory as downstate for startups. We also discovered that despite the fact that we are number 2 in the nation for R&D expenditure, second only to California, that California receives 50% of the venture capital invested on an annual basis. We also discovered in our, through our white paper that the New York venture capital industry loves the California startups, but the California startups don't necessarily love New York. California VCs don't necessarily love the New York startups. Of the monies invested by New York State venture capitalists, 40% goes to California startups, 51% to other states and countries, and only 9% stays in New York State. Of the monies invested by the California venture capital industry, 72% stays in California, and less than 2% goes to New York startups. In terms of stage of investing, you can see that very little goes to seed or startup, the vast majority to later and expansion. And we find that when we look at how that breaks out in upstate, downstate, obviously a disproportionate amount of the money goes to the downstate market. But the interesting thing to note on this particular slide in this particular year is that the narrow band of seed capital that is invested in both upstate and downstate. So this led us to believe, at least at that time, that there was a problem for seed capital in both upstate and downstate. So with that, among others, we came to the conclusions that there is an enormous amount of R&D in New York State that is not effectively being leveraged in either upstate or downstate. And compared to any other state in the nation, New York has the greatest unexploited opportunity to create jobs, second only to California, but they're obviously exploiting theirs. And compared to any other region in the nation, upstate New York and Long Island have the greatest unexploited opportunity to create jobs. And we felt at that time that there is a very serious need for capital in the entire state of New York. So now we took a look at last year. Has anything changed? Are we still trending in the right direction? Are we still on track with our thinking? We see that in 2009, that although venture capital was about 35% less than 2008, $18 billion. Where did the money go? Once again, over 50% goes to California. You can see that 40% goes to Silicon Valley alone. But when you look at the asterisks of some of the others and add up all of California, it's over 50%. And in the New York area, we get 8%. Now, earlier today, Daniel had mentioned the number 4%. He said some people think that's a light number. Well, the reason that he has using the 4% is that this 8%, which the source of this is PricewaterhouseCoopers source for this, the New York metro region is actually defined and includes New Jersey and Connecticut. So we'll stay with that number, but that's where we get the 8%, but in actuality, it is closer to 4% in New York. So looking again at the venture capital investments in New York State in 2009, not a lot has changed in downstate. They still get a disproportionate amount, but please focus on the second pie chart for upstate New York in 2009. What is wrong with this picture? Instead of 4 pie wedges, there are only 2. You will note that there was no seed or early stage investments reported by the venture capital community in upstate in 2009. None. So while New York seems to be holding its own from the seed, very happy to hear that, and so on, upstate, the problem has actually exacerbated. So let's talk about the angels, because whenever I go to Albany, which I've done more times than I care to think about this year, and talk to them, a lot of them have had conversations with David Rose and others for the New York Angels, and you heard someone today say, hey, we've got more money than we have opportunities, we'd love to find them. I hope they find their way up to us, because As it now stands, that is not the case. But the angels really, truly are a potent force in the venture community. First of all, if you look at last year, the angels invested $18 billion, the exact amount of the venture capital industry, which is also something that people are not aware of. The angel community, which has begun organizing, actually, it's a major trend on a national basis, is that the angels that prior, for many years, were just isolated, it was hard to find them and hard to track them, have begun to formally organize, and so now it's easier to find them and easier to track them, and so we now have stats on them. And the angel investment community was responsible for creating 250,000 jobs in 2009. So they are truly a potent force in the investment world and in economic development. For Excel Partners, they are our primary source of co-investor capital. In New York, we try to keep track of the angel networks, and these are the ones that we are aware of. There may be others, but these are essentially the ones that Excel knows and works with. And you'll see that there are 4 upstate and 3 downstate, and I'm sure there are others, believe me. But I thought it would be very interesting because we just saw the pie chart where the venture capital community did not invest in seed and early stage in 2009. So the question to us was, well, maybe as is hoped and assumed, the angel community made up the difference for us. So what I did was to actually, just working with the upstate corridor, Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse, contacted the executive directors of each of those angel networks and asked them what they did in 2009 and, just as importantly, what they anticipated doing going forward in 2010. In 2009, in the upstate corridor, of those 3 angel networks, they did a total of 10 deals for $1.3 million in cash, or $130,000 per deal. Unfortunately, as we all know, that's a one-way ticket to nowhere. We certainly need substantially more than that for these companies to have valuation increasing milestones and get to the more to the early stage investor, the strategic investor. So basically, it was in this environment from 2009 that we launched Excel, that is, initiated and launched a public awareness campaign called Seed New York, or Invest in Innovation. And we went throughout the upstate region actually advocating for a seed fund. And our goal was basically threefold: to educate the public and the policymakers and the stakeholders throughout the regions, and to shed light on the unrealized potential to create jobs, and to expose the reality of the venture capital investing in New York State. And in the end, we were advocating strongly for the state to establish a statewide seed fund. And we were able to show in our presentation by the research that we did that we know that the seed space is the most critical space. It is the valley of death. It is the stage at which private money tends not to want to come into, and certainly the early stage investors tend not to want to come in there. And so in other states, that is precisely why the states have created state-supported funds in order to fill this capital gap for this very critical stage of a high-tech startup. During this same time, in 2009, in May actually, as we know from sitting here today, the governor formed 2 task forces, the Small Business Task Force. I was fortunate to serve on that, and I was actually on the subcommittee for the task force that brings us here today. And I think it was a combination of certainly the Seed New York campaign and the efforts of these 2 task forces, and as a result of the findings of these task force, the number 1 recommendation that came out of the task force was to create a seed fund for pre-revenue and startup companies. The rest of these bullets are all some of the other recommendations that came out of this particular task force. So the result was, hooray, in January of 2010, our governor in his State of the State established a $25 million new technology seed fund. And in February, the governor came out with his version, and the Assembly came out with their version. In March, the Senate adopted the Assembly version, so now you have a legislative bill and a governor's bill that needs to be negotiated. In April, for all the reasons that we're aware of, the amount was reduced to $15 million, and at one point, the Speaker of the Assembly actually removed the seed fund from the budget altogether. But our upstate delegation, in part Assemblyman Magnarelli, Assemblyman Morelli, Del Monte, Stokowski, and others actually went in to Shelley Silver and asked that that be restored because they understood that upstate had this dire situation. I don't think they realized how dire it was, in fact. Also in May, at the end of May, it got restored, by the way, so we're back on the table. And then at the end of May, the governor announced a strategy for $640 million in savings, including eliminating his very own $25 million seed fund. So it's been a real volatile ride here. In May, Mayor Bloomberg announced a $22 million fund for high-tech startups in New York City. So great for New York City. You know, they already have a small seed fund there that they operate, and now they have a $22 million fund that is just going to be focused on technology and I think one other area. So from our perspective, we were celebrating it for New York City to be able to get that for two reasons. One, we're happy that somebody has it in the state of New York, but it also took the pressure off the state to just try to find enough money to give it to the entire state, and hopefully we felt that this would give them some ability now to find some money to give to upstate. So here we are in June. We stand before you today. Certainly the upstate delegation, I've been told time and again, is committed to the seed fund, but with the $9 billion deficit looming, there's no question that every single add-on is in jeopardy, and while I haven't heard the latest myself, but I'm assuming that we probably will not see that in this budget year, which is too bad. So it's a zero-sum game. We'll have a new administration next year, and we'll probably be right back at this again, trying to see what we can do with the new administration. So meanwhile, back at the ecosystem, there are a lot of innovative things going on. I'm not going to go through all of these. You've heard so many wonderful stories today. I mean, Ed Reinfurt highlighted some wonderful stories. Each person who's gotten up has told some very innovative initiatives. I continue to applaud RIT. I know that that's a very provocative thing that Bill Dessler is doing, but hey, you know, bold action, and I applaud any bold action. My measure for people in this space is that, you know, the question is, would I take you on the Starship Enterprise with me? You know, that's the ultimate question. You know, you want to have these can-do people, you know, who boldly go where no one has ever gone before. That's the kind of person you want. So my measure is, I think I'd take Bill Dessler with me on the Starship Enterprise. The University of Rochester is breaking down barriers with a new degree program that combines engineering and management. It actually has the ability for the students to go in and pick up a patent off the U of R Office of Tech Transfer shelf and develop a business plan around it, and if so desired, they can actually look to commercialize that, and the university will help facilitate meetings with the VC or angel. So you see the university sort of doing a facilitating role with the venture community there. The Venture Help Desk is something that most of us in this room probably know Bela Musitz from High Peaks. And Bela has started this Venture Help Desk. Bela's another one I'd take on the Starship Enterprise with me. He is going into each of these universities, RIT and the University of Buffalo, once a month to sit in the tech transfer office to allow scientists and entrepreneurs and graduate students, anybody and everybody, to come and just ask him questions. He's the Venture Help Desk, and he says he gets anything from I want $500,000 to I think I have an idea, and everything in between. So this is a very, I think, proactive, effective way for the venture capital community that is reaching right in and going into the universities. He tells me, by the way, that his days are absolutely filled with appointments, which I find interesting. And then the last one I'll speak to is the tech commercialization team that is being currently done out of the University of Rochester, and it basically includes Excel, High Technology Rochester, a TDO, and the Office of Tech Transfer. And we basically meet on a regular basis looking at the portfolios of those technologies or startup companies that have launched out of the University of Rochester. And it's a combination of just collaboration and portfolio management. It is a way for us to basically combine coaching, mentoring, and capital to try to keep these companies moving in the pipeline, because oftentimes there's no adult supervision on them, and we would just want to make sure that they are achieving their valuation increasing milestones, and we're meeting and saying, what are the highlights, what are the lowlights, who stalled out, why, and putting our collective heads around the problem to try to move them forward. So those are some of the sort of broader things, but a lot of what we've talked about today, I've sat there and thought about it. First of all, I know you can't read this, and I always hate it when you get into presentations and people say, I know you can't read this, but I'm going to give you a tour of it in a second, and this is not as important as what I'm going to show you in the blank space, which you will be able to see. So a lot of what we've talked about today have been wonderful initiatives, and it reminds me of us really all being in a car driving down the Innovation Highway. That's what we've been doing all day. And at some point, industry has been behind the wheel, giving us direction and guidance. At other times, the government has. And then at other times, we've had, well, who else was up here? Industry, government, and some of the others. Like Dessler and so on. So different people, our speakers, have all been sort of the drivers behind the wheel, taking us down the Innovation Highway in a very strategic, effective, visual way, so we can all see where we need to go. What I propose this is looking under the hood, because this is really the grassroots effort, and this matrix is basically a profile of all of those entities and organizations that are currently functioning on a day-in, day-out basis in Buffalo, Rochester, Ithaca, Syracuse, and Albany. And they represent the broad categories of the ecosystem: support services, entrepreneurship, and funding. So you have incubators in the support services. In entrepreneur programs, you have training, educational, venture forums, business plan competitions. And in funding, you have seed, local angels, and so on. So what I thought would be interesting is we have spent all day talking about how we need to collaborate and how we need to have more synergies and work more effectively together. And it occurred to me as I was putting this presentation together that certainly from a grassroots level, we see much of that happening. So what you're about to see, the dots indicate how many of these support services, parts of the ecosystem, to be brief, are actually directly or indirectly interfacing with the university, and how many of these components and elements of the ecosystem are actively, directly or indirectly working with industry, and how many with VCs, and how many doing outreach either directly or indirectly with stakeholders in the community, and how many of these actually cross regions and are regional in scope. That's not a bad report card. And basically what it shows is that a lot of what we want to have happen is in fact actually happening at the very grassroots level of our respective organizations on a day in, day out basis, where the work, where the feet hit the street. It's actually happening. So you say, what's the problem? We've got it licked, we can go home, Missoula, let's bring it home. So there are two problems. And the first one is that as much as there's been a positive statement made today, the simple reality is, as I hope you have seen, our ecosystem, particularly the upstate ecosystem, is running on fumes. And we simply see that in a lot of the different organizations. You've just seen it for seed capital, so that's true of Excel Partners. High Technology Rochester was recently cited for its incubation program and its entrepreneurs in residence in its incubation program. That was a wonderful program that was put together and funded for 3 years by Wired. Wired went away in 2000, I think November of 2008 or 2009, Rami, I can't remember. And so now High Technology is challenged to continue and sustain and maintain the very program that put them on the national map. These are the kinds of things I'm talking about in terms of our ecosystem at the grassroots level running on fumes. I think Bob talked about this very cogently and in much greater detail, but it's more than just capital. The other parts of the ecosystem are infrastructure and human resources. It's the capital, it's all the support services, it's management. And I think I really like Bob's example of the coral reef. It's visual, it's alive, it's functioning, it's moving, it's breathing, and I really liked that because that is exactly what we're trying to capture and what we're trying to do by sustaining the ecosystem in the process. So how does that happen? And again, nothing new here. A lot of people say, well, government, and certainly we've all talked about it, but we've also found out today that government is not the answer. It is an answer, but it is not the answer. They can be the catalyst, as Daniel said, they can be a convener, but it takes more than that. It takes individual commitment. It takes each and every single person in this room making a conscious decision to be committed to finding what it takes to keep the ecosystem alive, both within our areas and even around the region. It requires collaborative leadership from the bottom up and from the top down. We believe it's happening from the bottom up because, for lack of resources, the bottom up, the nuts and bolts, the people with feet in the street have had to look to their neighbors to the east and west to find ways, to find solutions to deliver the services or the educational programs that the market is demanding. And so I applaud this particular session today because this, and the Armonk committee, because it is leadership, collaborative leadership from the top down. So I feel that's extremely important. And the final one is one that Bob also mentioned, and that's a focused agenda. I can't emphasize that enough in that we have these issues, we have these problems, and it is only when we will all be leaning together, locking arms, leaning together on a problem that it will get solved. And if we are all focused on a single problem and go after that problem, it's your Margaret Mead quote, actually. And going to Albany, I can tell you this, that if the leaders, those of you in this room, linked arms and stood in front of the policymakers in Albany and said, this is our problem and this is what we need, I could guarantee you it would actually absolutely happen. Daniel Doctori, last night he came in and was seated at our table for dinner, and during the dinner hour, we sort of got in a little discussion about this topic, and I think Ted said, oh, we get $4.5 billion, what are we doing, this kind of thing, and so everyone was sort of weighing in on what they thought, and one individual was saying, you need to do this, and you need to do that, and you need to have this, and Daniel, in a very polite, but very firm way, said, who is you? And I thought, he's right. He really sort of hit the nail on the head. You is me. You is you. You is us. And he sort of hit it pretty effectively for us. So I would just simply say that we've all known this. We've talked about this all day. It really does require more than any one entity, more than any one organization, more than any one person. It requires individual commitment, collaborative leadership on a focused agenda. And if we actually do that and follow through on this, as we've talked about doing today, then we are going to be able to realize, I think our reward will be the vision that the task force came up with that I keep handy and look at it periodically. If we do this, we can create an exciting new economy that promotes an environment where risk takers and entrepreneurs can thrive, where innovators, inventors, and investors can find each other, where there will be frequent and seamless collaborations between industry and higher education. This world will produce new products and enrich the lives of New Yorkers and will facilitate the opportunity for New Yorkers to lead the world in developing a more prosperous future at home and abroad. That was in the task force recommendations. I love this vision. It is very descriptive. It is very desirable. It's aspirational. It's inspirational. And so in terms of doing this and sustaining the ecosystem and building the vision, I think if nothing else, we've learned today that it takes a village and that it begins with us. Thank you very much. Joe Scaduto.
So we have great data, as always, about venture capital in the state of New York. Just an interesting point of information. In March, down on Long Island, a local VC firm announced, Topspin Partners announced a $15 million seed stage fund specifically focused on technologies emerging from Stony Brook, B&L, and Colton
Excellent.
Laboratory. Hopefully that will set the stage as a model for other private entities getting involved at that stage of technology development across the state, in parallel to things that government would be doing both in New York City with the Bloomberg Fund and with the Seed New York campaign. I think the ecosystem is coming together in that
Right.
regard.
Yeah, it is, it is. And certainly if they decide not to do the seed fund, then I would hope that they would do more for the angels to incentivize them to take those risks.
Just also don't want to underestimate what Walter was saying regarding a cadre of managers, experienced managers and entrepreneurs that can actually license technology from the institutions and be that face of the company. It's not just the capital, certainly capital is a
Right.
huge part of that.
Yeah.
But I was here, I was in Rochester last year,
Right.
the Wired grant that supported the Entrepreneur Residence Program. All the companies that had EIR were getting funding from some source.
That's right.
And down on Long Island, at least, we're struggling with where are those people
I know.
that have left large companies or have done startups before that can now take the reins of the next generation.
Well, I'm going to put a little plug in here for Nasser Ali and his Upstate Venture Connect, because that is one of the things that he and Martin Babinick are trying to do, which is to create a database that would basically connect the technical talent so that all the C-level talent, CTO, CIO, CEO, CMOs, whatever, that you would have a source to go to and tap into. I mean, as it is now, I mean, Excel was and is the only state-supported seed fund operating on a regional basis in upstate New York. And when people typically do need a CEO or CIO, they will call us. And we look first in their region, and then we usually put out an APB to our counterparts and say, does anybody know anybody tapping into the angels, and see what comes back, which is not a very organized way to do it, but that's the way it's being done. Yes, it is. It is available on our website, excelnewyork.com, and also on our seednewyork.org, which was the public relations campaign that we promoted, we set up. It has its own website. We actually have several seed champions from all across every industry, entrepreneurs, government, private. They weighed in on why they thought seed funding was important. It's all out there on their own words, so it's kind of an interesting site to go to.
We'll get up next to you, Teresa.
From your lips to God's ear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, ahead of schedule, and we have a little time left for open discussions, comments. I just want to say one thing to lead this off, and that is to remind everybody that we're not going to catch up to Route 128 Research Triangle for Silicon Valley next year. The seeds for those zones were laid in the early 50s, and it takes a long time to sort of move that along. So I think when Ed talked about this, coming up with metrics to sort of see where we are relative to these competitors, that's going to be incremental. But as long as we have a sense that we are closing the gap, that I think should be measured as success. But it's not going to be, we're going to be where Research Triangle or Silicon Valley or Route 128 is tomorrow. That's not the problem. Okay, comments? Yes, please.
Yeah, I was just, as I engage more and more, I learned about all of the various groups that are interested in advocating for and promoting this agenda. There's the President's Group, the task force, as well as Excel or other regional groups. There are other
Yeah, what's good?
activity. My experience in advocacy in Washington, I was president of an organization. It was the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology. This organization represented 22 societies in basic biomedical research and about 100,000 scientists. And then what we did, so we represented scientists, and we partnered with the American Association of Medical Colleges. That represented all the medical colleges, and then we partnered with the American Association of Universities, and that represented all of the universities. But through those coalitions, every year we would be going in with the same message. The result was the doubling of the NIH budget. Other activities. And so an advocacy strategy and an advocacy leadership group, I would really, if it doesn't exist, I would really urge some establishment of a structure that is communicating well, that is formulating the same message, that is developing the champions in both the legislature and the Senate as well as the House, and you just gotta keep beating the same drum with the same message until it happens. It does eventually happen. So I would urge at least some consideration of organization of an advocacy agenda like that going forward. In spite of the fact that the times are tough now, the money isn't there. You want to be there with the right strategies, watching the language, helping them write the language, etc. And that's how you really can get the things done.
Great suggestion. And I think the task force report again is the seminal vehicle by which to do that. And I'm thinking that this meeting today, we're going to solve all the problems, but the whole purpose of this conference was really to keep that task force report front and center, get some traction, and not let it get buried in the bad budget news coming out of Albany. I don't know whether we do yet another one of these come next fall, maybe, but I really see that we can all pull together just to keep coming back, and maybe variations on the theme. It may not be the same tune, but I think that absent that kind of continuous effort, it's not going to change. It's not going to change. Other comments?
One of the things we've been talking about is how do you connect these various pieces, and from certainly the experience that many of us have in doing investments in early stage enterprises, you do bet on the management team and their ability to execute. And so if you look at the unemployment rate in New York State currently, and the number of senior executives, New York City, wherever they happen to be,
big presence there in New York City. I think the kinds of things that Teresa's doing, I think that there we will find natural common advantages, but they really haven't materialized yet. I agree. And that's also going to take some very conscious effort. Ed?
I was in New York City yesterday. You know, this is for the extreme Upper West Side. So this is not a big deal. You go down, do it in 12 hours, and down the back over a meeting. The problem, so the problem is $300 contract, right? So we need a nerd express. Right? Like a daily plane. Plane load once a week or something like that for $100. Hey!
Why should the cab to the new world be paid for so much physical travel? Is there a way for us to pay this virtually?
So this is a question that I asked folks from Rochester when they came to Syracuse to give this briefing. And, you know, I do energy and environmental systems. And, so I have this naive hypothesis about the density and geographic distribution. And that is actually a really question that why can't we just connect electronically? So I think the magic of Sand Hill Road is like going to Starbucks and bumping into people. So physical proximity is an important thing. And that meeting that happens in New York City with 13,000 people and but that's we have to get together. So I think getting together periodically is essential for creating interpersonal relationships. Because I think the distance collaboration is really our challenge.
That's great. So, you're referencing the meetup.com.
Right.
Meetup. Now, there's thousands of meetups, but this one in the city with 15,000 people on distribution list, that should probably exist on the state level. So maybe there is a need to at least create a meetup.com group for New York State tech.
And then I'm going to come back to maybe there's this meetup plan, right? In Rochester, and Buffalo, and Syracuse, and Albany, and so I think through the process of e-rate, I'm passionate about upstate, I'm passionate about Syracuse, but I think one of the cultural things in upstate is to appreciate the resources of the New York City metropolitan area and to accept it and embrace it. So I really think upstate ought to be like Upper Bronx. Like one, when you read the New York Times about upstate is like beyond Westchester County. It's like one thing. And you should just say, all right, we're in upstate, and it's just this one thing. Culturally, it's all these little communities across upstate. But really, we have to connect. I'm at least from Brooklyn. I'm just saying that.
As a Brooklyn guy, I feel like an outsider in so much is going on in Manhattan.
That's the Bronx is like,
Love to have you all connect to New York.
who's that right there? Hey, that's our infrastructure.
It's been 100 years. Next up space and downspace. So Ted, I always love the big ideas, $25 million seed fund and New York meetup and let's get a plane ride going back and forth, et cetera, et cetera. But something that Teresa said really resonated with me this afternoon, and that is that individual commitment concept. And I think for all of us leaving here today, it's what am I going to do Monday morning or next week or this month to support entrepreneurship and technology commercialization in my local community. And I think if all of us did that on a consistent basis, we would create and build upon our own ecosystem relatively quickly, actually.
And I honestly think that's happening. I've been sort of knocking around here for 25 years, and there is no question at Syracuse University there's an initiative toward entrepreneurship I've never seen before. No question that's happening at Rensselaer. No question that's happening at RIT. No question that's happening at Stony Brook. So I think we are moving in the right direction. When it's not going to change tomorrow, we can't give up. But I think the pieces are coming in place, and I absolutely agree that until we begin to develop the management expertise to wrap around the technologies, we are nowhere. Because people will But I think we should begin to do that.
Just to be more specific, I mean, seriously, action items like join an advisory board of a local startup company, volunteer to mentor students who want to be entrepreneurs, participate in the technology commercialization clinic on one of the teams, do the basic workshop as an advisor for 2.5 days for one of those teams. I mean, literally, people need to step up and say, I'm going to do something about this myself. And if we did that in mass, I think the impact would be tangible.
I agree. Yes, John?
So just touching on what people have said about who's us, like who's us? Is it me? Is it you? And I asked Daniel one time in the report, during the process of writing the report, how many faculty members were actually invited to speak at these subcommittee hearings? And the report is by, he said one faculty member. Now, for Syracuse University Anti-Science, the faculty and the graduate students are bread and butter. They all need us. They spark innovation. They spark inventions. But yet, all these conferences, faculty are never represented. Is there any way to get faculty unions or somebody who can represent the faculty to be at these places? How do we engage faculty to say, hey, this is about your children living in New York State, creating an environment where the economic development comes from you guys. But yet they're never around to talk to. Why isn't there a tech transfer workshop at American Chemical Society meetings or any other engineering community? So something for us to think about. How do we engage faculty more in these dialogues? That's all.
Well, again, I think that's changing. I really do think that the culture, again, back when, not today, the culture back when I was at Harvard Law School, they prided themselves in not hiring anybody who never practiced law. That was a badge of honor. And I think that's very true, both in the arts and sciences, engineering, that somehow you got your hands dirty if you were playing around with industry at the same time you're doing research. I think we're well past that. And it's always occurred to me that the two schools that have never had a problem partnering with industry are MIT and Stanford. And they've done fairly well for themselves. So I think that's the model. I think we're past that. I really think we're past that. And to the point that I think, Bob, you're talking about Rensselaer's a policy where faculty members wanting to start a company take a leave of absence without any penalty whatsoever for 2 to 3 years without losing time on the tenure track. I think that's a huge, huge step in the right direction. Beginning to count patents as part of your promotion and tenure file, I think is a huge step in the right direction. So I think we're slowly doing those things. But as in a lot of things, what the problem is our competition, and I really think it's our competition, they are not standing still. They're not standing still while we're trying to catch up. And I want to mention Research Triangle, University of North Carolina. They have just published what they call the Carolina Express License Agreement. And even though it's an express license agreement, it's still 29 pages long, but it's really very straightforward, and it's intended to be executed within a matter of hours. And it's a 2 to 3% running royalty rate, no upfront fees for patent costs or anything else, and a cash out at the first liquidity event of something like 5% of whatever the liquidity event was. That's it. And so what does that say? That says that Duke, North Carolina State, they are really determined to build their economy at the expense of maximizing licensing revenues for the individual schools. And this is the way to do it. Way to do it. So those things are happening, but they're the things we have to catch up to. They're the things we very much have to catch up to because they're not standing still as we're trying to catch up before. So you ready for the iPad draw? Molly, so before we do this, everybody has a business card here? Molly, you check to make sure no one put in more than one of these? We ordered these. And so while we're doing this, I also wanted to say thank you to Molly Zimmerman, Von Zell Jones,